To the big exclusive interview of the day, Ruchir Sharma in conversation with Shireen Bhan.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan and my guest today is one of the most influential voices on the global economy, the world in 2017 with Ruchir Sharma. Ruchir, many thanks for joining us and congratulations because The Rise and Fall of Nations has made it to the most popular list in the business category on Amazon.in.
Well, thanks so much. This book meant a lot to me because it was really putting together 20 years of research in terms of 20 years of learning about what are the different factors that drive different countries politically, economically, geographically. So to see this come this way through and for this to be the best-selling book in India this year in the non-fiction space means a lot to me. So thanks for that.
Well, let's start by talking about India then,
right.
Ruchir, and then we'll talk about the rest of the world and where you see markets headed. But in terms of India, the biggest factor to deal with at this point in time is the big D word, demonetization.
Right.
Now, you've been fairly critical. You believe that this kind of therapy was not justified. You also believe that if you look at the cash to GDP ratio, then it's not outrageously high at 12% of GDP for India. In fact, you believe it's comparable to other economies like China, Thailand, etc. You've said that revenge cannot be a development strategy and India cannot leapfrog in that sense by using demonetization as the route. But do you believe that do you buy any of the economic arguments that the government is presenting that yes, there will be short-term pain, but in the long term, this structurally changes the India story?
No, I don't see the economic argument for this. I think that the debate has now shifted that whether there's any political benefit to this, because I think that a lot of people in India have been surprised, at least outside observers, by how well India has coped with this. Now, this is a huge step to be done in a non-crisis environment, because usually these kind of measures are taken when a country is going through some major crisis, a financial crisis, some inflation crisis, but this step has been taken outside of a crisis environment. And I think that most people in private will tell you, whether it's the government or business people, that they don't really see any enduring economic benefit of this. The best case that I've heard about this is that this was a lot of pain for nothing, which is that you got a lot of pain, but the enduring benefit will not really be there from an economic standpoint. Everyone now is debating when will this economy get back to some sort of normalcy? Because I've been meeting a lot of business people in the last couple of days. I've been in India, and the common number I've heard from everyone is down 30%, which is that roughly, if you look at all the sort of evidence in terms of sales or other things, or whether it's advertising, retail, etc., the most common number I've heard is that things are down about 30% from a year ago this month. So December is really the pinch month for this. And I think that most people agree that the benefits of this, people spoke about a fiscal windfall, other things. I think most people now come to the conclusion that none of that will be there. But the debate now is shifted to politics, which is that, is there some political benefit to this?
Do you believe that there will be political benefit?
I think it's too early to say. And I think that this is where we are really in uncharted territory, because I had come to believe that in India, over the last couple of decades, the political paradigm had shifted. That in this country now, good economics was good politics, right? That if you sort of delivered on very high economic growth, low inflation, you would get elected. If you didn't, you would get booted out, like the previous government got booted out. So UPA won on the back of, I think, a very good economic track record for growth and inflation. UPA 2 was a disaster in terms of growth and coming off. And inflation, corruption, like other factors, but really growth, inflation, just stick to the basics, and it got. So I thought that was working at a state level as well, that different states that we traveled to, that was working. I'm not sure what's going on in India today, which is that because this is such an emotive issue, it's like almost like saying we want to end terrorism. Who can argue against that? We want to end black money. We want to end corruption. We want to. But my experience, having traveled to different countries, is the fact that it is very difficult to end these things in such a manner. That these things are done more organically over time. There's not a single developing country I go to where corruption is not a major issue. Like 2 weeks ago, I was in Mexico, and it was very interesting what was going on out there. In Mexico today, the single biggest factor which anyone will speak to you about is corruption, about corruption like the political system. But here's what happened. In the year 2000, they introduced state funding of elections. Now, as you know, there's a big talk about that in India too, that listen, the next follow-up step needs to be state funding of elections. So Mexico,
cleaning up at least political funding.
Yeah, but in terms of, but this is one of the solutions to that, which I've heard about. But here's the problem with this. So like in Mexico, they introduced that in the year 2000. Because they were close to the United States, that's what we should do, have state funding and free television space to all the political parties. 16 years later today, they think that corruption is way higher in the political system than it was when they first introduced this.
Okay.
So that to me is the point, that these symptoms of a very high share of a parallel economy, very high use of cash in the economy, or things like basic stuff like corruption. These are the unfortunate plights I feel that many developing countries suffer from. And it's only as they get richer that or more prosperous that you find that these traits sort of come off, that you begin to move to a more normal environment. And this is my case as far as India is concerned, that we're at a very basic level of economic development. Our per capita income is just $2,000. At this level of development, all we have to do is to follow the best practices of what other countries have done to have gotten less poor and more prosperous. We don't have to reinvent the wheel out here. That is something for economies at the technological frontier to try and do that, to come up with new things, like in the United States or other economies. They have to spend a lot on research and development to come up with new things, because they've already reached a very high level of development. At our level of development, we don't have to do this. We just have to basically stick to the basics and get those basics correct. And I think that the real problem, which I think that that we face from, is that we tend to be quite insular. Like last decade, I felt that one of the biggest mistakes that policymakers made in India was to confuse a global boom with a local boom. That all emerging markets were booming, and the rising tide lifted everybody, and we thought that something special was going on here, where really it was a global boom which was lifting us. Similarly, out here, these type of experiments, whether it's demonetization or other things, are being carried out in other countries, political funding of elections. All we have to do is to basically look at what other countries are doing and what the global trends are. The other thing which I found very fascinating is that this decade, the amount of cash being used in the global economy has in fact gone up. Right? So now you think that the entire global economy is moving towards
less cash.
Exactly, less cash or digitization, etc. But this decade, the amount of cash being used in the global economy has moved up significantly in many countries. Like in countries like Japan, in fact, the cash as a share of the economy is 20%. Right? So yeah, like we're at 12, we're at the other extreme of 20%. And my point here is that why is this happening? So Japan's the classic case. When you have very low interest rates, or the real interest rates are virtually nothing or negative, and there's less faith in the banking system, people tend to keep more cash.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened in Japan as well. You've seen such a surge in cash take place. Now, corruption, I don't find that much of a relationship with that. Japan is hardly a corrupt society at 20% cash as a share of the economy. Similarly, Pakistan's cash as a share of the economy is less than ours at less than 12. I don't think Pakistan is a less corrupt state than what India is. So I think that this is about sort of just learning and incorporating what other countries are doing and following those examples. So if you're less insular and use other templates in terms of what's going on, I think the results for us will be better. But I think now it's, like this has happened. There's no point sort of going on about this.
Absolutely.
It's time to move on,
yes.
right? In terms of what are the next big issues that we need to deal with, what is the next big stuff. And here I again find that what is happening in the United States today with the new president out there, the implications of that are very significant, including for India.
Okay, I'll come to that in
implications
just
for
a second,
yeah.
but I just want to, end the demonetization conversation because
You don't wanna leave that in the end. Yeah.
just
Right,
another
sure.
couple of minutes. The evidence at this point in time on the actual impact on the economy is largely anecdotal.
Yes.
So you talked about 30% is what you're hearing.
Yes.
That's the common refrain when you talk to businesses in India. But what do you think will be the implications for the GDP in the short term? And do you believe that this is going to be more than 2 quarters? Is this going to be a protracted slowdown that we should brace ourselves for? What is your own sense? Because there is no precedent, to talk about.
So therefore, it's very hard to predict because even the GDP data, as is like wacky data.
Yeah.
For example, someone told me that in fact that because the number of deposits in the system has increased furiously, that in fact will help show an increase in GDP growth, because the financial sector will show that the GDP growth has picked up significantly because the number of deposits has gone up significantly. So I think that just looking at GDP data, that's very quirky. So I don't think that we're going to see the effects of that. My hope is that India is a very resilient economy, that it's able to withstand lots of shocks. It goes back to my original point that our level of development is very basic, so we are able to withstand these shocks and we move on. The problem, though, I think, is that people haven't adjusted expectations much. I was, for example, speaking to my team here about what the earnings expectations of the market are. And I find that like staggeringly high. Like people have barely cut back their earnings for this fiscal year. They're still expecting 10-11% type of growth, even though the first half was like 3 or 4 or something. And for next year, they expect 18% growth in like earnings. So I think the problem in India has to do with...
not realistic?
I mean, I just, like, it just seems very high. We've got so much economic disruption going on. Some of it is even justified, expecting GST, etc. to come. And it seems as if this move, basically, for now at least, has killed a lot of animal spirits in the economy. Because a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of traders are sort of feeling that they've been labeled as just being crooks in terms of this, and a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. So I think this has killed a lot of animal spirits in the economy. But I think that to forecast what the exact path of this will be, nobody knows. So I think that, so therefore, even on the marketplace, we're seeing complete confusion. There's complete lack of activity, right?